The NFL draft is only days away, which means the longest, most grueling episode that I will make all year has finally come back around again on the calendar, the annual Film Room Mock Draft Special. If you've been with me for the last 2 years, you've seen the first and second editions of this special, so you probably know the rules by now, but if you're new, here's how this works. We've got 4 guidelines to remember as we go through this mock. 1, time codes for all individual picks are in the description, so if you only care about your team and don't give a damn what I have to say about anyone else, you can hop on down there and go straight to your pick. Obviously, it looks better on my metrics to have you watch the whole show, but I understand that it's long as f*** and not everybody has time to do that. Number 2, all picks that you see in this mock draft are not predictions. In fact, I know that I'm going to be wrong on pretty much all of these in terms of who actually gets picked up by what teams, but I'm not trying to accurately predict what will happen. I'm trying to pick players that I would take if I were the GM of all of these individual teams so that I can then go back and compare these mocks in a few years to what actually happened to see where I was right and where I was wrong in my evaluations on these players. For example, 2 years ago, I had Eddie Jackson as a top 12 pick when nobody else did, and now he's an all-pro. But in that very same mock draft, I also left Patrick Mahomes out of my first round, and now he's the league MVP. So it's nice for me personally to be able to go back and look at that mock and see how my grades for these prospects held up, and while doing that, I can examine why I was right or wrong so that I can improve as a scout going forward. Now, number 3, my picks will be determined not just by my own player grades for these prospects, but also the individual needs for the teams themselves, as well as their future needs based on the salary cap and contract structures. Again, I'm approaching this as a real general manager, so even if the team that I'm representing doesn't have an obvious need right now at a certain position, if I see that they will have a need at that position maybe next year based on their cap space or the contracts that they have in place, I'll heavily weight that when I'm making a pick, so keep that in mind. And lastly, even though I know that there's going to be a lot of trades on the actual draft night, I will not be making any trades in this mock. They're too damn hard to predict, and it's even harder to predict what the compensation would be on any of those trades anyway, with so many hypotheticals, so I just don't even bother with that. I make the picks as is, and I let the chips fall where they may. So with all that out of the way, let's kick off this mock draft in true film room fashion by completely ignoring what every single reporter in the country is telling us and taking Quinnen Williams first overall to the Arizona Cardinals. Yes, I know that Kyler is rumored to be the guy, but as I said 2 weeks ago, I don't think that it really matters. Both he and Josh can run this system, in my opinion, and even though Kyler can probably run it slightly better because of his mobility and his familiarity with it, to me the difference between the offense with and without Kyler is not the same as the difference in the defense with and without Quinnen, and that's even after factoring in the signing of Darius Philon from the Chargers, who is a very good player by the way, but he's not Quinnen Williams, and he won't improve this defense the same way that Quinnen will. He adds so much to the unit beyond just being a good pass rusher. He's an elite run defender, he can play anything from a cock nose to a 5-tech, he can 2-gap, he can 1-gap, he's smart, he's a leader, he's the closest thing I've seen to a perfect defensive tackle prospect. And to me, since the Cardinals already have a promising young QB on their roster and an offensive system that will help that QB be very successful, I just don't see how I could pass on Quinnen. He's the best player in the draft, and they need him a hell of a lot more than they need a slight upgrade at quarterback. So again, it's just kind of a no-brainer to me. Quinnen is my guy, and I'm going to stick with that all the way to draft night. Now, with Williams off the board, I think all the Bay Area can breathe a sigh of relief at second overall because that ensures that they're going to get the guy they want more than anyone else, Nick Bosa. He's basically exactly like his brother in that they have almost identical athletic profiles, they use the same moveset, and I think they even have the same weaknesses too, because both Joey and Nick can run into a lot of trouble against tackles with longer arms. We saw that very plainly back in 2017 when Nick struggled mightily against Bobby Evans and Orlando Brown when they were both at Oklahoma. But even though they do have the same weaknesses, the fact that they have the same strengths means that Nick's floor as a player is just as high as Joey's floor. I believe he's about as bust-proof as you can possibly get, and that in itself is very valuable. Will he ever be an elite Defensive Player of the Year caliber pass rusher? Probably not, but I think he's going to go to a lot of Pro Bowls and be a very consistent sack producer from year to year, and if I know that I'm getting a high-floor, consistent player with a top 3 overall pick, I would consider that a pick well spent. I would rather swing for contact and hit a double by taking Bosa than swing for the fences with someone else and strike out. So that's my philosophy when it comes to drafting him this high. You really can't go wrong by taking him, so I'm just going to grab him while I can. Now, with that, let's move on to pick number 3 with the New York Jets, and at this spot, I'm pretty much in agreement with every other analyst out there who has Josh Allen taking his talents from Kentucky to New Jersey. Allen is not nearly as polished as Bosa, but he's very athletic and has a lot more burst off the snap, which to me makes his speed rush even better than Bosa's. He doesn't have the same power or refinement with his hands yet, obviously, but I think with the right coaching, he can develop that eventually and become a very well-rounded player. And it doesn't hurt that he's already pretty experienced in coverage, too. So he's got a much lower floor, but also a much higher ceiling at the same time, and I'm banking on Greg Williams and Joe Vitt, who will be working with him the most as his position coach, to unlock that potential and reach that ceiling. If he does, there's nothing stopping Allen from being a consistent 12-plus sack per year kind of player, which is exactly what the Jets defense has needed the most for well over a decade at this point. Is Allen a risk? Yes, a little bit, but it's a risk that I feel like I kind of have to take because as long as Sam Darnold is my quarterback, I don't think I'm ever going to get another shot at a raw talent like this again. Moving on now to the Raiders at 4th overall, and I think this is a spot where we start to hear people rumbling about Kyler Murray. There's a lot of rumors floating around about Oakland being enamored with Murray's talent, which I can understand why because he's amazing, but I personally don't want to move on from Derek Carr yet. I still believe in him as the quarterback of this team, and I think a lot of his struggles have come down to the roster around him kind of crumbling over the last few years. So even though I love Murray, and even though the actual Raiders might love Murray too, I want to give Derek a little bit more time to get back on track. I know there's still a great QB in there somewhere, so my main objective with all 3 of these Raiders first round picks is to give Derek a good support system this year so that he can get back to being the cornerstone of this franchise. And part of having a good support system is also having a good defense. And there are very few defensive players in this class that I covet more than Devin White from LSU. He's got blinding speed to the sideline, unreal quickness from hole to hole, and he's so damn athletic that I think you could put him man-to-man against any receiving back in the league, and he could probably lock them down. It's rare to find a linebacker with this kind of athleticism, and I think he can step in from day one and be a major contributor on this defense next to Vontaze Burfict and Brandon Marshall, as well as a monster on all 4 core special teams units as well, so keep that in mind too. And by the way, yes, I know that the Raiders still do need an edge rusher, so I can understand why some people might be upset that I didn't take one here, but based on my big board, I didn't think that there were any edge rushers after Bosa and Allen that were worthy of a top 5 pick, so I just went with the best player on my board that I could reasonably justify taking, and that was White. Plus, Burfict's contract is only for 1 year anyway, so it's not a stretch to think that he could be gone after 2019, with White being his long-term replacement/upgrade, so I know that White might not be the most popular pick for Oakland, but all of those reasons make sense to me, so I'm comfortable with it. And that brings us to the 5th overall pick and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where I'm going with Jawan Taylor, the right tackle from Florida. DeMar Dotson's up there in years, he's going to be 34 this season, and to be honest, the Bucs are in desperate need of tackle depth anyway because they're kind of one injury away from disaster right now. So I think Taylor gives them a perfect swing tackle for 2019 in case one of their starters gets hurt, or maybe he could even be a starter at guard if they think he could do a better job than Caleb Benenoch or Alex Kappa, and then in 2020 he could slide back out to right tackle and take over for Dotson, assuming that he would no longer be on the roster. As a prospect, Taylor is a huge, long, hulking tackle that can control edge rushers with raw strength, and even though he doesn't have the quickest feet, he's so damn long and powerful that if he does get his hands on you, it's pretty much over. Like, you have to be a true freak of nature to be able to get around his reach, either with raw burst, or bend, or length, because he's just so damn big. I think he's going to be an irreplaceable fixture on whatever offensive line gets him because he's so reliable as a pass protector, again, even without the best feet, and he's dominant as a run blocker as well. He does a really good job bringing all of that power to bear on people when you run behind him. So overall, while the Bucs might not need Taylor this year as much as they need help elsewhere on the team, I think he's just too good of a player to pass up, and they would have had to fill this need next year anyway, so I'm kind of okay with just getting it out of the way early. And that brings us to the Giants at pick number 6, and this is where we finally see our first quarterback go off the board. I'm taking Kyler Murray from Oklahoma, and even though I know that there's a 99% chance that he does not make it to the Giants, I think he does fit them extremely well. He's accurate, he's smart, he's comfortable working the short game and getting the ball out quickly, but he also has the arm talent to stretch the field, and he can be an absolute nightmare on zone reads and options and that kind of stuff when you pair him up with Saquon Barkley as well. The Giants line has gotten better on paper than it was last year, but it's still obviously not perfect, so having mobility back there will be useful to get out of a rush too. And just overall, I feel like there really isn't a downside to his game at all, other than maybe his size and potential durability concerns if he starts taking too many shots. I hated on the Giants a lot for passing on Darnold last year and taking a running back instead, but if this does actually happen, and if they do manage to get lucky enough to land Kyler Murray after everything that's gone down, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with all that suffering and all that frustration because it somehow led to getting Saquon Barkley, Kyler Murray, and an extra first-round pick to help them further build this team. And in the end, all of that is worth it. It's unlikely and it's unexpected, but at least in this fake scenario, it's definitely what I would call a happy ending. Moving on now to Jacksonville at 7th overall, and this is honestly kind of a worst case scenario for me as the Jaguars GM because I really wanted Jawaan Taylor here, but he's off the board, so now I've got to get a little bit creative, and after a lot of thought on this pick, I eventually settled on Dexter Lawrence, the defensive tackle out of Clemson. Lawrence is the 12th overall player on my board, and I have him that high because he's a very rare commodity in today's NFL. The 3-down nose tackle. Not only can he anchor down and use that huge 340-pound frame to absorb double teams and dominate against the run, but Lawrence is also a very effective pass rusher, and he can destroy the integrity of the front of the pocket with all of that power too. That is a really hard thing to find, and when you look at how the Jags defense operates, with them being a nickel so often and rushing only 4 defensive linemen most of the time, you can't really have that system function without a good 3-down nose tackle. You need a player that can absorb double teams or protect Telvin Smith from blocks on the second level. You need someone who can wash centers and guards out of the way and make room for Yannick Ngakoue stunting up the middle for easy sack opportunities. And most of all, you just need that big, powerful, mean defensive tackle to act as the linchpin for the entire front seven, and that's what Dexter Lawrence can do. And I know what you're thinking, well, they already have one of those in Marcel Darius, but when I look at Darius' contract and how it's structured, I don't think he's even going to be on the team past 2019 anyway. He's got a $22 million cap hit in 2020, which is his final season under contract, and the Jags aren't exactly swimming with cash as it is with Jalen Ramsey's eventual contract extension looming large in the near future. So I think next year, they're probably going to have to choose between the Darius contract and AJ Boye's contract, and by taking Lawrence here, I can effectively make that decision a full year early and keep Boye around for the foreseeable future while also re-signing Ramsey. So in the end, this pick is just as much about cap management as it is about acquiring talent, and as GM, that's just something that I've got to take into account. Sometimes I've got to make picks a full year early just to prevent my main core of talent from falling apart during contract negotiations, so that's exactly what I'm doing by taking Dexter at 7th overall. And on that note, I have a similar mentality for making the Lions pick at 8th overall because I'm taking Ed Oliver, another defensive tackle from Houston. Going into the 2019 season, I know that next year I've got 3 players that I definitely want to re-sign: A'Shawn Robinson, Taylor Decker, and Graham Glasgow, but I've only got $43 million to work with. So if I sign all 3 of those players on the open market, which would undoubtedly be very expensive, I don't know how much cash I'm going to have left over to sign anyone else, let alone potentially extend some other talent that will be due money the following year in Darius Slade, Damon Harrison, and Marvin Jones. So to me, the safest bet here is to stick with my board and take Oliver, knowing that he can help me immediately in 2019 as a rotational player behind Robinson, while also giving me a cheaper replacement and upgrade long-term for Robinson so that he can then go get paid in free agency, which gives me a hell of a lot of cap flexibility to go after some other free agents and make some competitive offers. Do the Lions really need a defensive tackle right now? No, probably not, at least not immediately. But they'll likely need one really badly at some point in the next 2 years, and defensive tackle prospects like Oliver don't exactly come around often. He's absurdly explosive and one of the most athletic prospects to come out of college at any position in the last 5 years, not just defensive linemen, and I think he could provide value all over the place in hybrid fronts that Detroit likes to use. You want to rush him off the edge? He can do that. You want him to play 3 technique? He can do that too. You want him to stand up and drop on zone blitzes and actually pick up receivers and coverage? He's athletic enough that he could probably handle that as well. I mean, the guy moves like a tight end anyway, so it's not like covering one is out of the realm of possibility. Just overall, he's an incredible blank slate of a prospect who could use a year as a rotational player anyway so that he can improve his technique no matter what. So to me, the Lions fit him just as much as he fits the Lions. There's very few spots that I would rather have him end up than Detroit, if we're being honest here, and as the Lions GM, I'm just thankful that he actually fell this far. Moving on now to the Bills at pick number 9, and I'm going with Andre Dillard, the left tackle from Washington State. The Bills could use all the help they can get when it comes to offensive line depth, and even though they do have a starting left tackle already in Deion Dawkins, I don't think that Dawkins is as good as Dillard anyway, so I have no qualms about having Dawkins be my swing tackle for depth while I slide Dillard into that starting spot and instantly upgrade my line from day one. He's a very easy mover in his kick set, he's incredibly athletic when blocking out in space as a puller and on screens, and he's got the length and hand placement down to be a great pass protector from the moment he steps on the field. I think the best possible move I can make to help out Josh Allen's development is to surround him with enough talent to help him be comfortable, and Dillard can definitely do that. If I'm Buffalo and Andre is still on the board, I'm running this pick in with zero hesitation because it's a perfect fit for the player and for the team too. And that brings us to pick 10 and the Denver Broncos. And as the Broncos GM, I'm considering myself extremely lucky because Dwayne Haskins is just sitting there and begging to be picked as my quarterback of the future. I don't expect him to last this long in the real draft on Thursday night, but the fact that he made it all the way down to the Broncos in this scenario is totally fine by me because Denver is a great situation for him. He'll get a year or two to sit and learn behind Joe Flacco, which Haskins does need because I don't think he's quite ready to play yet, so he could use that time on the bench to kind of watch and learn, and then once he finally does see the field, I think he has all the tools necessary to be a really good starting quarterback. His arm talent is fantastic, he can make any throw you need him to deep down the field, he's fearless in the pocket and doesn't let the rush faze him at all, but he also has something that a lot of other young quarterbacks don't, and that's patience. Haskins has no problem with just dinking and dunking defenses to death and doing his best Tom Brady impression with never-ending 5-yard passes, and many young quarterbacks just don't do that. They look for shots, they try to make hero throws on every play, and they just don't take what the defense gives them, which leads to turnovers, and Haskins doesn't take those risks. He's not scared to take shots, mind you, he's just safe when he does take his shots, and that's a very underrated quality in the NFL. So overall, I'm really excited by this fit because the Broncos get the best of both worlds with their quarterback situation. They have a veteran who can play right now and potentially help them make a playoff run with a very strong roster and coaching staff, but they also have a young option for the future who can take over down the line and lead this franchise for the next 15 years. So I'm really happy with how this worked out. Again, I don't expect it to actually happen on Thursday, but if it did, and that's a big if, I would be really, really stoked if I were a Broncos fan. Moving on now to the Bengals at 11th overall, and my top priority for this team is to do literally anything about this offensive line. They need a new right tackle, I don't care that they just signed Bobby Hart, they still need one, and Jonah Williams I think could start ahead of Hart immediately. I'm not going to let a bad free agency signing stop me from directly upgrading in the draft, and believe me, Williams would be an upgrade. His technique is flawless, his pad level through contact is fantastic, and he's got some grit as a run blocker as well. Is he as physically gifted as Taylor or Dillard? Absolutely not, but I think Williams could be an above average right tackle in the league for the next decade, and that is a highly valuable asset to me. Andy Dalton is not the kind of quarterback that can carry the team. He needs protection and he needs a run game, and Williams can help give them both. So as long as he's on the board here, and as long as he can help me not have to start Bobby Hart in week 1 of next season, he's my guy. Up next, we've got the Packers at pick number 12, and I'm going with Rashawn Gary from Michigan, which I know for a lot of Packer fans probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but here's how we look at it. The Mike Pettin defense relies heavily on bringing waves of pressure, lots of blitzes, and constantly rotating different players in and out. Pettin loves versatility first and foremost because that lets him move his pieces all over the board and kind of get really creative with his pressure packages and personnel groupings, so a guy like Gary is a dream fit for him. I know that they just signed Za'Darius and Preston Smith, but to me, neither one of those guys are really top-end rushers. They're more like complementary rushers that happen to be making a shitload of money now, and neither one of them are as versatile as Gary anyway. He can be lined up as anything from a 3-technique rusher inside, to a 5-technique in base 3-4 looks, to a stand-up linebacker off the edge, to a blitzing linebacker from the second level, and while he might not be elite in any of those things, the fact that he can do them is incredibly valuable. You look at Jadeveon Clowney in Houston, who plays a similar role as kind of a movable chess piece that can do a little bit of everything, and even though he's not putting up elite numbers in terms of sacks, he's absolutely irreplaceable in that system because they do put him everywhere, and his presence everywhere screws up blocking schemes a lot. So when I look at Gary, not only do I think he's a better player than both of the Smiths, but I think he's more versatile as well. And I think his presence in that defensive front would open things up for everyone else, just like Clowney's presence opened things up for Watt, Merciless, McKinney, and Cunningham. Again, I agree that defensive line is probably not Green Bay's biggest need, especially after free agency. But I also don't think that Pettine's system can work to its maximum potential without a player like Gary anchoring it. So I'm not comfortable passing on that kind of talent when he's just sitting on the board for free. Za'Darius Smith and Preston Smith are not good enough or versatile enough to make me pass on him, and that's just how I look at it. Would adding Gary to this front seven be overkill for one offseason? Yeah, maybe. Do I care that it's overkill one bit? No, not at all. And with that, let's move on to pick number 13 and the Miami Dolphins. And with the 13th pick, I am taking my 11th overall ranked player in Christian Wilkins, the other Clemson defensive tackle. The interior of the Dolphins' defensive line was atrocious last year, which was a big reason for their terrible run defense and extremely inconsistent pass rush. So upgrading these defensive tackles should be one of Miami's highest priorities in this draft. Luckily for them, this happens to be the best DT class I've ever seen though, because in most cases, Wilkins probably would not make it out of the top 10. He's an extremely effective 3 technique who reminds me a lot of Geno Atkins, and not just because of his power and leverage, but also because the guy just has an uncanny ability to slip through blocks right off the snap. Like at times it almost looks like someone dumped a vat of grease on him before the game because people just can't get their hands on him. He's so quick and so slippery, and week after week he just manages to kind of sneak his way into the backfield and blow plays up. It's really amazing watching him on film, and everything that he did well in college, at least to me, also translates extremely easily to the NFL. He wasn't just out-athleting everyone in the ACC, even though obviously he's a pretty good athlete. He produced with technique and hustle and instincts, and all of those traits will make him an even better pro. Wilkins to me is one of the safest players in this whole draft, and I think he's exactly what the Dolphins defense needs to fix one of their most crippling weaknesses. They should consider themselves very fortunate to need a defensive tackle this year because in most years, they would never ever have a shot at getting this caliber of player at 13th overall. And speaking of getting lucky by needing a defensive lineman this year, I am stoked to be the Falcons GM right now because Brian Burns is still on the board. The Falcons need edge rushers, specifically they need one that's not named Vic Beasley, and Burns is one of the very best in this class. He's super explosive, he's got good length, he's got fantastic bend around the corner, he's got variety in his rush moves, but most importantly, he's got versatility in positions. I think Burns can play either linebacker or defensive end, so no matter what the Falcons decide to do with him, whether it's keep his hand in the dirt for a traditional 4-man front, or keep standing him up in more of a hybrid kind of underfront, which they have run at times in the past, I think he can do either one. He's a direct upgrade from Beasley immediately because he's more than just a speed rusher, and to be honest, I would not be surprised if he led this team in sacks as a rookie. If the Falcons want to be taken seriously as an NFC contender again, or even just as a division contender again, they've got to be able to get after all these great NFC quarterbacks and disrupt them. And Burns, at least in my opinion, is just the kind of player who can help them do that. Moving on now to pick 15 and the Washington Redskins, and I'm actually going to go a little bit against my own big board here because I'm taking my 4th ranked quarterback as my 3rd quarterback in the first round, and that's Drew Lock from Mizzou. I actually, ironically enough, have Ryan Finley from NC State at 31 on my combined big board and Drew Lock at 32, so they really are neck and neck, but for the Redskins in particular, I think Lock is a better fit than Finley. Finley, in my opinion, is more ready to play right now, but he's not as naturally talented and probably limits your playbook a little bit, whereas Lock has all the talent in the world, but I think because of his inconsistency with dealing with pressure and making some truly inexplicably bad throws, I'm not sure I'm ready to just kind of throw him out there against NFL caliber defenses that are going to pressure him relentlessly. Lucky for Lock, though, he doesn't have to play right away in Washington because they have Case Keenum and Colt McCoy ahead of him on the depth chart, and even if by some freak accident he did play as a rookie, their offensive line, their defense, and their running game should be good enough to kind of protect Lock from himself, so to speak. So that's a very rookie-friendly situation, kind of like how Denver is a really friendly situation for Haskins, and if that situation does pay off and Lock does develop to his full potential, look out, because this kid is crazy talented. Like, he's probably the most talented pure passer in this draft. He can make some truly ridiculous throws with velocity and placement and timing, and when everything is working just right, he looks like he should be in consideration for a top 5 pick. I mean, that's the kind of ceiling we're talking about here. I don't know if he'll ever actually reach that ceiling because a lot of that comes down to coaching, kind of like how Andy Reid's coaching was a big factor in Pat Mahomes reaching his full potential. But to me, just the chance that Locke could reach that potential for the Redskins like Mahomes did for the Chiefs makes this pick more than worth it. He's a very boom or bust prospect, I'll give you that, and that's why I had him as my 4th ranked quarterback. And at 15th overall, it might feel like a little bit of a Hail Mary. But believe me, if there was any organization that was very much in need of a Hail Mary right now, it's probably the Redskins. In my opinion, the reward here is 100% worth the risk. Next up, we've got Carolina at pick 16, and we're seeing our first corner come off the board now in Washington's Byron Murphy. And I know there's a lot of upset Panthers fans out there who really wanted an edge rusher, but to be honest, based on my own personal big board, I didn't think that there was any edge rushers worth this pick. I know Montez Sweat and Cleveland Ferrell are probably the most popular picks that you see in a lot of mock drafts, but I just don't value either of those guys highly enough to make them top 20 picks. Byron Murphy is a top 15 talent on my board and a true number 1 corner who can do it all, and since I'm not exactly enthused by James Bradberry anyway, and he's in the last year of his contract, I would rather draft Bradberry's replacement this year with a player that actually fits the value of this pick. Worst case scenario, I try to find another edge rusher on day 2 and hope I strike gold, but I don't want to way overdraft a non-quarterback position just because I'm desperate. Besides, defensive lines tend to get a hell of a lot better if nobody is open behind them, and between Murphy, Dante Jackson, and those excellent coverage linebackers, I'd be willing to bet that not many receivers are going to be open anyway, so that's going to help the front 4 no matter what. I know that Murphy is probably not the pick that most Panthers fans expected, or even wanted, but that's just how the board fell, and you can be confident that at the very least, you're still getting a really damn good player, and that's something you can be happy about. Alright, next up we are back with the Giants for the second time at pick 17, and we've already got our future in place with Kyler Murray, so now I want to further solidify that future by taking Dalton Risner from Kansas State. A lot of people are wondering if he's a tackle or a guard, and personally, I think he can play right tackle and be a really damn good one at that. He's kind of a similar player to Jawan Taylor in that he's big and thick and powerful, and once he gets his hands on you, you're kind of screwed, but he's got really underrated feet as well. He fires out of that stance way quicker than you would expect for someone his size, so because of that kick slide being good enough, I do think that he can be just fine at tackle. And with him at right tackle for the Giants, starting ahead of Chad Wheeler, of course, that would give Big Blue a line of Solder, Hernandez, Jalapeno, who's healthy again, Zeitler, and Risner. And that starting 5 would be infinitely better than what they had to work with last year, so much so that I would actually be kind of excited to see the Giants offense next year. Saquon Barkley was incredible last season, even without good blocking, so once he actually does have holes to run through, who knows just how ridiculous his numbers are going to be. And at the same time, Eli Manning's protection will also be improved, or Kyler Murray's, depending on how long he rides the bench, which will give these QBs more time to find Shepard and Tate and Ingram down the field. So for the first time, we'll actually get to see what a functioning Pat Shurmur offense really looks like in New York, and I'm excited as hell about that because they really do have a lot of talent on paper. So Risner's my guy, not just because he's one of the top players left on my board, which he is, but also because I think his addition can help transform the entire team overnight. And at the end of the day, transforming your entire team overnight is kind of the goal with your first round pick anyway. Moving on to pick 18 in the Minnesota Vikings, and I don't care if I need to spend literally every pick I've got to do it, but as God is my witness, I will come out of this draft with an improved line for Kirk Cousins. I just have to commit to that because it is so unbelievably long overdue. So as my first act on that quest, I'm going to be drafting Chris Lindstrom from Boston College. He's a very, very solid guard prospect who can play either left guard or right guard. He's a fantastic pass protector with excellent hand placement and leverage, and he's got really quick feet to kind of help him redirect and wash defenders out away from his quarterback. He's also a pretty good zone blocker too in the run game, not overly powerful, so I don't think he's ideal for like a power or a gap run scheme, but since the Vikings run a lot of zone with Dalvin Cook anyway, that's not really a big deal to me. The most important things I need from a guard in this system are pass protection ability and zone blocking ability, and Lindstrom can do both of those in spades, so he's definitely my kind of guy. Is this maybe a little high for him based on my big board? Maybe. I've got him as my 29th overall prospect, and this is pick 18, so it is a tad high, but he's such a great scheme fit that I think he'd be a lot more successful here than on most other teams anyway, so that big board ranking is a little bit fudgeable in that regard. Overall, he's super solid, I know what I'm getting, his talent fits the pick, and he fills a massive, massive need on the roster, so I really couldn't be happier to get him. Pick 19 now with the Tennessee Titans, and I've got Jerry Tillery from Notre Dame going in this spot. And believe me, this dude is not getting the attention he deserves as a prospect. If it weren't for a labrum injury he suffered early in the year, he'd probably be unanimously considered a top 15 to 20 pick. And in the first 5 weeks of the season before that injury, he had 7 sacks and was one of the most dominant defensive linemen in the nation. After that injury, however, he played through the rest of the season and only had 1 sack for the remainder of the year because he was hurt. He's a special talent when he's healthy who can play in pretty much any defense, but his best fit, in my opinion, is a 3-4 system just like the one Tennessee happens to run. In this system, he can play right next to Jarrell Casey and Daquan Jones and act as a 2-gapping 5-technique defensive end, and then on third downs, he's a good enough pass rusher to be extremely disruptive inside and make it so that quarterbacks can't step up in the pocket, which of course helps Harold Landry and Cameron Wake to get their jobs done out on the edge. If I was going to compare him to anyone, it would probably be a mix between Mike Daniels and DeForest Buckner, who are both phenomenal players in their own right. And if Tillery ends up even being 80% of what I think he's capable of, he will be well worth this pick. And to me, since the Titans are so close to becoming a playoff team once again, they just need to add a final few pieces to get there. I think Tillery is just what this defense needs in order to make another postseason run this January. And that brings us now back to the Steelers, who are also very close to being a playoff-ready team again, even without Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. And with this pick, I'm going to be giving them the one thing that they've been trying their hardest to get for several years, but can never seem to actually find: a number 1 corner. Amani Oruwariye is my second-ranked corner in this class, and one of only 3 corners in which I gave a first-round grade. But out of all those first-round corners, I think he might have the highest ceiling. His footwork is cleaner than everyone else in this class except for maybe Julian Love, but he's more explosive than Love and fires out of his transitions quicker. He can play off, he can play press, he can play catch technique in between, he's fine in man or in zone, it doesn't really matter, and he's just a flat-out scheme-proof corner. If you use him the same way that the Jags and Texans used AJ Boye, where he just sits in off-man coverage and dares quarterbacks to try and throw slants against him, I think he's going to be really hard to complete passes against. He just gets to the catch point so damn fast, faster than Byron Murphy even, and I think on the Steelers in particular, you can put him on the field in your nickel package from day one, if not just outright starting him in your base defense, and he'll make an immediate, very noticeable impact on the unit as a whole. He's a really awesome talent, and I think whatever team ends up getting him is going to love having him on their roster. Next up, we've got the Seattle Seahawks at 21st overall, and now that the Russell Wilson contract situation is dealt with, I feel a lot more comfortable about the core of the franchise and their stability going forward. And the thing with stable franchises that you know are probably going to be good no matter what, is that these are the kinds of teams that can afford to either take risks in the draft or draft players that might need more time to make an impact. When you've got a QB like Russell, and you know that you're more than likely going to be in the playoff hunt because of Russell, that gives you an opportunity to take a chance on guys like Jeffrey Simmons out of Mississippi State. He's coming off a torn ACL from a couple months ago, so there's a decent chance that he won't be able to play until late in the season, if at all, but you could easily argue that his tape in college was that of a slam dunk top 5 pick. If he didn't get hurt before the combine, he absolutely 100% would not be here this late for me to take. So since I have a quarterback and I have a core of talent that is probably going to keep me in contention anyway, and I don't necessarily need my first round pick to contribute immediately, I'm perfectly fine taking a risk like Simmons because there's no other way that I could normally be able to draft that kind of talent in this spot. In terms of what he brings to the field, Simmons is a devastatingly powerful interior lineman who reminds me a lot of Fletcher Cox, but he's even quicker than Fletcher was when he was also coming out of Mississippi State. So not only can he collapse the pocket on passing downs with power, but he can penetrate and make plays against the run as well. I mean, he is just so monstrously good at pretty much everything that were it not for his injury, I probably would have had him as my second overall rated player behind only Quinnen Williams. So this is a tremendous value for Seattle to get him this late in the first round. It's exceedingly rare to see this kind of talent fall all the way to the 20s, and luckily for me as GM, the Seahawks are one of the very few teams that I think have the stability and the culture in place to make this investment work out. So I'm super pumped about it, and if this does actually happen on the real draft night later this week, I think Seahawks fans should both be not surprised at all and also super excited about it too. And with that, let's go to the Ravens at pick 22, and when you look at Baltimore's depth chart, I think the most glaring weakness on the team by far is wide receiver. Like, this is probably the worst receiving core in the league, and I don't think it's particularly close. Their top three, as it stands today, are Willie Snead, Chris Moore, and Seth Roberts, which inspires zero confidence in anyone. So my top priority here is to help Lamar Jackson out as much as humanly possible by upgrading the weapons around him. And there might not be a more dangerous weapon in this entire draft class than DK Metcalf, so the fact that he's available all the way down here at 22 is very, very fortunate for me. If you watched my breakdown on Metcalf a little over a month ago, I made the case that in the right system and with the right coaching, he could play the exact same role that guys like Calvin Johnson, Demaryius Thomas, and Josh Gordon have all played in the past on their respective teams, and that DK could be just as productive in that role as all those names before him, and I still believe that to this day. Metcalf was one of the most criminally misused receiving prospects that I've ever seen at the college level, so much so that I feel like his box scores are just a straight up lie. Ole Miss only ever let him run 2 routes in their system, and he was used as a glorified decoy for AJ Brown most of the time. They never made a concerted effort to actually get him the ball as their primary read, their quarterback situation was inconsistent at best, and despite pretty much everything at Ole Miss working against him, he still managed to be just as productive as AJ Brown on a per-game basis before he got injured. I know that people see Metcalf as just a workout warrior rather than a legitimate number 1 receiving prospect, but I'm telling you he's a much better player than the box scores indicate. If you put him in Baltimore with a coaching staff that will likely use him and prioritize him, I think he and Lamar Jackson could do fantastic things together. Now, of course, I still do have a lot of questions about Lamar himself, but to me, as GM, I've got to do whatever I can to give Jackson a chance to develop and to answer those questions. He can't get better than he was if he has nobody to throw to, so this is easily the most stress-free pick that I'm going to be making in this entire mock draft. Lamar desperately needs help, and I think DK can give him that help, so to me, there's no reason why DK shouldn't be a Raven. It's really as simple as that, and when Baltimore's on the clock, if Metcalf is still on the board, I honestly can't imagine them picking anybody else. Moving on now to my favorite team, the Houston Texans, who are making their return to the first round after not having a first rounder last year, and just like Baltimore, my top priority is helping out my young quarterback. Deshaun Watson obviously has a lot more weapons to work with than almost any other QB in the league, but his offensive line could also be the worst line in the entire league. So no matter how good those weapons are, it kind of doesn't matter if Deshaun is running for his life on every play anyway. So I've got to do whatever I can to improve his protection and also improve the Texans' run blocking on early downs to help make those passing downs more manageable. And that brings me to a very underrated center prospect out of NC State, Garrett Bradbury. Bradbury is an exceptional athlete who can do everything from reach blocking nose tackles without any help from his guards, to pulling out in space on counter runs to blow up linebackers, to effortlessly passing off stunts in protection to help preserve the integrity of the pocket. I mean, you name it, he can do it. And I think his skill set could be extremely valuable to the Houston offense if he still happens to be on the board at 23. If I was going to make a comparison to anyone still in the league, it would be to either Jason Kelce or Alex Mack, both of which are incredibly quick zone centers, and you'd be hard-pressed to find any Eagles or Falcons fan that didn't think either one of those guys are insanely important to their offenses. I know we all like to talk about the left and right tackle positions being the most important spots to fill on the line, and yes, I agree that they still are, but you kind of can't function without a great center either. So with a need at center, and with the best one still being on the board here, I'm just going to go with Bradbury at this pick and sleep like a baby. At the very least, I know that I'm getting a really damn good player here, and I'm getting him at a good value, which in the end is all I really want out of a first round pick. Next up, we've got pick 24 and the return of the Oakland Raiders to this mock draft, and with their second first round pick, I'm going with Montez Sweat out of Mississippi State. Admittedly, this is a lot lower than a lot of other mocks have him, but I don't want to make it seem like I don't like him as a prospect, because I do. I think he's going to be a very, very solid starting defensive end for a long time because he's so long and so explosive. But that being said, he still does have more issues with leverage and bend than some of the other edge rushers I've got going in front of him, like Burns and Allen, so that does factor into my evaluation quite a bit. If he does figure out those leverage issues and he works on his hip flexibility to close a little tighter around the corner, I think he could very easily be a perennial Pro Bowler kind of talent, but I'm just not sure he's going to be able to do that because he's a very tall, high-cut kind of body. That's just how he's built, and when you're built like that, sometimes it can work against you and cause problems with your balance and power. So overall, how Sweat is going to win at the next level is by using his first step and his incredible arm length to keep tackles at bay while he works his way around the edge, which is the exact same way he won most of the time in college too. His arms are just so long that nobody could get their hands on him, so if he can do the same thing in the NFL and just outreach those tackles off the edge, he can still be very successful. But whatever team that drafts him is just going to have to be conscious of the fact that if he is going up against a tackle that also has long arms, he doesn't really have any other ways to win. He's so tall that he can't really dip and rip underneath those tackles because he's just not flexible enough, and his bull rush is very hit or miss as well because, again, he's really tall. So in the end, his production as an edge rusher might be very streaky. There's going to be weeks where he goes up against a tackle that doesn't have the length or the proper hand placement to deal with him, and he'll absolutely blow those games up. And there's going to be weeks where he does go up against a tackle that can match his length for length, and he'll completely disappear. And ironically, that's kind of the same problem I had with Nick Bosa, in that they both struggled against tackles with longer arms, but for completely different reasons. Bosa has the bend and the leverage, but not the length or the explosiveness, whereas Sweat has the length and the explosiveness, but not the bend or the leverage. If you put their talents together, they would basically be Myles Garrett, because Myles has all four of those things, but each one of them only has half. And that right there is probably a good indicator about how much higher of a grade I had on Myles individually than either Bosa or Sweat. But anyway, I digress. Sweat is still a really good player, and he's still very much worthy of a first-round pick for Oakland. I just wanted to say my piece on why I have him at 24th overall as kind of a late first-round value, instead of somewhere in the top 15, which is where most people have him going these days. Either way, I think the Raiders will be thrilled to land him at this spot, and rightfully so. Let's move on now to the Eagles at pick 25, and I've got Devin Bush from Michigan going here. Philly is very thin at linebacker right now, and really the only one in the whole unit that I actually like is Nigel Bradham, so by adding Bush, I'm giving them a big boost to one of their weakest position groups on the whole team, if not the weakest. He's got incredible speed, fantastic coverage ability, he's a blur off the edge as a blitzer, and just overall he fits the prototype for what a linebacker should look like in the modern NFL. You can knock him for not being that big, of course, and he's not someone who's going to be taking on pulling guards in the gap and plugging everything up inside with his strength, but he's such an easy mover in space, and he fits what the Eagles need so well that I don't think I can afford to pass on him. The linebacker class is very, very thin this year. In fact, it's probably the thinnest I've ever seen it, to be honest, and I'm not sure how many opportunities they're actually going to get a quality linebacker in this draft. With a prospect this good staring me in the face in the mid-20s, I kinda just have to take him and be thankful, because after he's gone, there's not a whole lot left to choose from. Now, from there, let's move on to the Colts, who hold the 26th overall selection, and there's two things you've got to understand about this pick before I make it. Number one, I still think they need help at corner, particularly on the outside. And number two, this is a defense that plays zone coverage literally 87% of the time. That's the second highest rate in the league, so they just can't take any corner and expect them to do well. They need a corner who you feel comfortable with in a zone-heavy scheme. Someone who can read route patterns really well, someone who's tough enough to play the run out on the edge because zone teams tend to use their corners as force players. They need someone who has excellent fluidity and short area quickness, even if their long speed isn't particularly great. There's a very specific mold to follow here if they want to upgrade their secondary. They can't just pick anybody. But luckily for them, the best corner left on my board happens to fit that mold exactly in Rock Ya-Sin from Temple. Ya-Sin is a fantastic zone corner prospect who I think compares very favorably to Desmond King down in Los Angeles, in that they're both great corners who happen to play the position like a safety. They've got fantastic instincts, solid ball skills, they can identify and close on patterns in a hurry, they both play the run with tenacity, they're just both very, very safety-ish in terms of their style of play. I'm not sure how I feel yet about Ya-Sin potentially being manned up all game long against a number one receiver, because again, that long speed is a wee bit of a concern, but in this system, he wouldn't have to play a lot of man, so it doesn't really matter to me that much. He's really at his best in zone, and on this team, he would be playing a hell of a lot of zone. So that in itself is a great fit to me. Next up, we've got the third and final Raiders pick of the first round, and I'm going with a player that I actually have a lot higher on my overall big board than this draft pick would indicate, TJ Hockenson from Iowa. I've got him as my 13th overall player in this class, but he slipped all the way to 27 because I just couldn't really find a fit for him earlier than this that I liked enough. But in Oakland, I think this is a great landing spot for him because they have a huge hole at tight end, and he can contribute to their offense in more ways than just being a receiver. Hockenson is a fantastic inline blocker, which we know that John Gruden values a lot, so he'll definitely get a ton of snaps, even as a rookie, and I think he's one of only a few tight end prospects in the last 3 years that has true 3-down ability right from day one. So if the Raiders really want to keep pounding the run and taking shots off play action to Brown and Williams, Hockenson can absolutely help them do that, as well as maybe catching some of those play action bombs himself from time to time too. Remember that I said that my main goal with this draft for the Raiders was to help build a supporting structure around Derek Carr so that he could get back to being a great quarterback, and I think I've done just that. I improved the defense with Devin White and Montez Sweat, which will give Derek a bit more breathing room if the offense has a slow start, and I also gave him a very versatile new weapon in Hawkinson that fills a huge position of need. Obviously, we can still debate the merits of the trades that gave them these picks in the first place, and if those trades were even the right thing to do, but I did the best that I could with the hand that I was dealt, and in the end, I think I got 3 really good players out of it that are all going to be a part of this franchise for a long, long time. Moving on now to the Chargers at pick number 28, and when I look at this roster, the first, second, and third impression that I get is that this is a team that is desperately in need of some defensive tackle help. They lost Darius Philon to the Cardinals in free agency, which absolutely gutted their depth, and it's not like they were a very deep team at defensive tackle before they lost Philon, so that just exacerbated the problem. And as we saw in the playoffs, without any top-end talent on their interior line, the Patriots just ran right over their front 7 and blew them out before halftime. They need a new 3 technique that can stop the run and help Bosa and Ingram get after the passer, which is maybe the most important thing of all, and I can think of nobody better at this point in the first round for that role than Zach Allen out of Boston College. Allen is a little bit underweight for the position at the moment because he actually played defensive end in college, so he'll have to bulk up by about 10 pounds, but his frame can very easily carry that weight, and he's already got the length and strength that he needs to be a really stout presence inside. I think if you put him as a full-time defensive tackle that plays somewhere in the low 290-pound range, he can basically be the Chargers' own version of Kyle Williams, who's someone that played anywhere from a 2 technique all the way up to a 5 technique on any given down throughout his career, and I think Allen could do the same thing in LA. You add 10 pounds of good, healthy weight to that frame, you move him all over the front just like Williams, and he can be a really, really productive player for you for a very long time. I don't know if he's ever going to be considered in the same class as some of the other excellent defensive tackles that we've got coming out this year, but in most years, I think Allen would be considered among the very best defensive linemen in his class, and that is saying a lot. This may be a bit of a cross-position projection, but to me, the Chargers are one of the few teams that I think can make that transition work out really well, so I think it's a good pick for all sides. Next at pick 29, we've got Jonathan Abram, the hard-hitting, smack-talking safety from Mississippi State, going to Kansas City. This is a defense that is so depleted and so thin that you could basically throw a dart at the entire starting lineup and find a position group that needs help, so I'm just going with the top defensive player left on my big board, and that's Abram for sure. He's a human missile of a strong safety that brings toughness, instincts, and reliability to the Chiefs' run defense, but he's also a really underrated pass defender too. He's not just a box safety and just a one-trick pony, he can make an impact on all 3 downs, and I think he complements Tyrann Mathieu very well in this secondary. Mathieu can play in the deep middle and play traffic cop as the free safety, while Abram roams the underneath zones and looks for people to hit, and those are probably the 2 spots where both of those guys are the most comfortable. So to me, this is an all-around great fit. He complements their existing personnel, he fills a need, and most importantly, he's a great value on my big board because I actually had him as my 24th overall player. So all of that sounds like a win-win-win to me. Moving on now to the Packers at pick 30, who are also making their second appearance in this mock draft, and I'm going with Noah Fant here from Iowa. He's the other great Hawkeye tight end that I have graded as a first-round talent, and it just so happens to be that the Packers are in huge need of a super talented young tight end to replace Jimmy Graham and Mercedes Lewis in the long term. Fant is a really interesting player because while he's not as refined or as physical as his teammate TJ Hawkinson, he's a hell of a lot more athletic and more dangerous as a receiving target. He's the kind of tight end that is an absolute nightmare to handle in the seams, and his unreal speed makes him especially dangerous on those drag routes and deep overs that Matt LaFleur likes to dial up off of play action. I think Green Bay could line him up as their move tight end from day one and get really creative with him as kind of a big slot receiver, and then as he continues to develop as a blocker, he can probably start to take on more snaps as a true Y tight end in the future. He's got an extremely high ceiling as an athlete, obviously, and if there was any system out there that really knows how to use athletic tight ends in space, it's the Shanahan-inspired offense that LaFleur runs in Green Bay. And if you don't believe me, just ask Shannon Sharp, George Kittle, Jordan Reed, Owen Daniels, or any other number of tight ends who have previously put up fantastic numbers in this style of system. Believe me, it works, and if this offense could make George Kittle one of the most productive tight ends in the league within his first 2 seasons, I think it can do the same thing for Fant too. From there, let's go to pick 31 and the Rams, and when I make this pick, I have to consider 2 things first and foremost: future positional needs and cap space. Aqib Talib might be in his last year in LA because his deal is up after the season, and if Marcus Peters doesn't pick up his play in 2019, he could be on the way out as well because his deal also expires after the year. And considering that the Rams are going to have to pay a big money deal to Jared Goff and potentially also Dante Fowler next summer, I think it's reasonable to go into this pick with a plan to save some money at corner by drafting one in the first round on a cheap rookie deal and then spending that money elsewhere on my quarterback and edge rusher. So that plan to find a cheap but still starting caliber corner is leading me to take Julian Love out of Notre Dame. He's one of my favorite DBs in this whole class because everything he does is just so damn clean. His footwork is crisp and efficient, his hand placement and hip fluidity are excellent, and his raw explosiveness is pretty good too. I think you could put him in the slot as your starting nickel immediately and upgrade your entire pass defense, and then in 2020, once either Talib or Peters moves on, or maybe even both, you can probably play him on the outside as well, which only adds to his versatility. If I was going to compare him to anyone, it'd probably be Casey Hayward from the Chargers because they have a very similar skill set as off-technique corners, and I'll tell you what, if you can get a player like Casey Hayward with the 31st overall pick in any draft, that's a pretty good deal to me, so I feel great about this pick. And with that, we have finally arrived at the 32nd and final pick of this mock draft with the New England Patriots, and I'm going to throw out a name here that almost nobody else is considering for them in the first round, but it's a player that I'm totally obsessed with, and I think he deserves consideration here, Darnell Savage from Maryland. When I watch Savage play, he reminds me so much of a young Devin McCourty, but he's even more athletic than McCourty ever was. He's got the range to play in center field, the short area quickness to play in the slot, and the instincts and ball skills to act like a robber in shallow zones, and all of that versatility just screams Patriot to me. McCourty's played all over the New England defense for a decade now, spending time at corner, safety, and nickel, and I think Savage could pick up right where Devin left off for the next decade. I know that they still need pass rush help and receiving help, depending on the health of Demaryius Thomas, but to me, Savage is way too good of a player to pass up here, and I'm almost positive that they would not get another chance to draft him in the second round if they don't take him in the first. They can still get another great receiver on day 2 if they really want one, but they sure as hell aren't getting another Darnell Savage, and that's what really matters to me in the end. He may not be the conventional or the obvious pick, but to me, he's the right one. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the 3rd annual Film Room Mock Draft Special. I know that many of you probably have a lot of questions and comments about why I put certain players in certain spots, or why I just didn't include some notable players at all, so I encourage you to drop those in the comments below and I'll answer as many of them as I possibly can. This is always the most labor-intensive episode that I make all year, and it takes weeks to put together, but I know that you guys love watching it as much as I love making it, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you for sticking through the whole thing. Thank you for your comments, your questions, your support, and I sincerely hope that all of you have a great draft weekend. I'll be back next week with another show with all of my post-draft reactions, both good and bad, so until then, later.